Well, the news was all over town in 2 minutes, and you could see the people tearing down on the run from every which way, some of them putting on their coats as they come. Pretty soon we was in the middle of a crowd, and the noise was like the tramping was like a soldier on march, and the windows and dooryards was full, and every minute somebody would say over a fence, "Is it them?" And somebody trotting along with the gang would answer back and say, "You bet it is." And when we got to the house that the street was packed in front of, and then I got to see what that is about. Oh, it's a message. I'm going to have to check that or it'll do weird stuff. And hey, look at that. I hope they open again soon. Um, let's hope the Chinese restaurant opens again soon. When we got to the house, the street in front of it was packed, and the girls was standing at the door. Mary Jane was redheaded, but that don't make no difference. She was most awful beautiful, and her face and her eyes was all lit up like glory, and she was so glad her uncles was come. The king, he spread his arms, and Mary Jane, she jumped for them, and the harelip jumped for the duke, and there they had it. Everybody, most leastways women's, cried for joy to see them meet again at last and have such good times. Then the king, he hunched to the duke private. I seen him do it. And then he looked around and see the coffin over the corner on two chairs. So then him and the duke, with a hand across each other's shoulders, the other hand to their eyes, walked slow and solemn over there, everybody dropping back to give them room, and all the talk and all the noise stopping, and people saying shh, and all the men taking off their hats and drooping their heads, so you could have heard a pin fall. And when they got it there, they bent over and looked in the coffin and took one sight, and then they bust out a crying, so you could have heard 'em to Orleans, most near. And then they put their arms around each other's necks, and they hung their chins over each other's shoulders, and then for 3 minutes, maybe four, I never seen so two men leak the way they done. And, mind you, everybody was doing the same, and the place was that damp that I never seen the like it. Then one of 'em got on one side of the coffin, the other got on the other, and they kneeled down and rested their foreheads on the coffin, and let on to pray to themselves. Well, it come to that it worked the crowd like you never seen anything like it, and everybody broke down and went to sobbing right out loud. And the poor girls too, and every woman nearly went up to the girls without saying a word, and kissed them solemn on their forehead, and then put their hands on their head and looked upwards towards the sky with tears running down, and then busted out and went off to sobbing and swabbing and give the next woman a show. I never seen anything so disgusting. Well, by and by the king he gets up and comes forward a little, and works himself up and slobbers out a speech, all full of tears and flappledoodle, about it being a sore trial for him and his poor brother to lose the disease, and to miss seeing the diseased alive after all the mile-long journey of 4,000 miles. But it's a trial that's sweetened and sanctified to us by this dear sympathy and these holy tears, and so he thanks them all out of his heart and out of his brother's heart, because out of their mouths they can't, words being too weak and cold, and all that kind of rot and mush, till it was most sickening. And then he blubbers out a pious goody-goody amen, and turns himself loose, and goes to crying a fit to bust. And the minute the words were out of his mouth, somebody over in the crowd struck up the doxa jeweler, and everybody joined in with their might, and it just warmed you up and made you feel as good as church letting out. Music is a good thing. And after all that soul butter and hogwash, I never see it freshen things up so, and sound so honest and so bully. And then the king begins to work his jaw again, and says how him and his nieces would be glad if a few of the main principals of the friends and the family would take supper here with them this evening, and helped set up with the ashes of the diseased, and says if his poor brother lay yonder could speak, he knows who he would name, for they was names that was very dear to him, and mentioned often in his letters. And so he will name them, to wit, as follow, vis-a-vis, the Reverend Hobson, the Deacon Lot Hovey, and Mr. Ben Rucker, and Abner Shackelford, and Levi Bell, and Dr. Robinson, and their wives, and the widow Bartley. Reverend Hobson and Dr. Robinson was down to the end of the town a hunting together. That is, I mean the doctor was shipping a sick man to the other world, and the preacher was panking him right. Lawyer Bell was away up in Louisville on business, but the rest was on hand. And so they all come, and shook hands with the king, and thanked him, and talked to him, and then they shook hands with the duke, and didn't say nothing, but just kept a-smiling and bobbing their heads like a passel of sapheads, while he makes all sorts of signs with his hands, and said goo 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 all the time, like a baby that can't talk. And so the king he blattered along and managed to inquire about pretty much everybody and every dog in town by his name, and mentioned all sorts of little things that happened at one time or another in the town, or to George's family, or to Peter, and he always let on that Peter wrote him the things, but that was a lie. He got every blessed one of them out of that young flathead that we canoed up the stream. Then Mary Jane, she fetched the letter her father had left behind, and the king he read it out loud and cried over it. It give the dwelling house and $3,000 gold to the girls, and it give the tan yard, which was doing good business, along with some other houses and land worth about $7,000, and $3,000 in gold to Harvey and William, and told where $6,000 in cash was hid in the cellar. So these two frauds said they'd go and fetch it up, and had everything square and above board, and told me to come with a candle. Well, we shut the cellar door behind us, and when they found the bag, they split it out in the floor, and it was a lovely sight. All them yaller boys. My, the way the king's eyes did shine. He slaps the duke on the shoulder and says, "Oh, ain't this bully or nothing?" "Oh, no, I reckon not." "Why, oblige ye, it beats the nonesuch, don't it?" Well, the duke he allowed it did, and they pawed the yaller boys, and they sifted through them with their fingers, and let the jingle down on the floor, and the king he says, "It ain't no use talking, being brothers to such a rich dead man, and the representatives of furrin heirs that's got left in the line for you and me, Bilge. This year's come to trustin' to Providence. It's the best way in the long run. Well, I tried 'em all, and there ain't no better way." Most everybody would have been satisfied with the pile, and took it on trust. But no, they must count it. So they counts it, and it comes out $415 short. Says the king, "Darn him, I wonder what he done with that $415. Well, they worried over that a while, and ransacked all around for it. And then the duke he says, "Well, he was a pretty sick man. Likely he made a mistake, and I reckon that's the way of it. The best way is to let it go. Keep still about it. We can spare it." "Whoa, shucks, yes, we can spare it. I don't care nothing about that. It's the count I'm thinking about. We want to be awful square and open and above board here, you know. We want to lug this here money upstairs and count it before everybody. Then there ain't nothing to be suspicious about. But when the dead man says there's $6,000, you know, we don't want to—" "Hold on," says the duke. "Let's make up the deficit," he says, and began to haul out yaller boards out of his pocket. "Well, that's the most amazing good idea, you duke. You have got a rattling clever head on you," says the king. "Blessed if the old nonesuch ain't helping us out again." And he begun to haul out yaller jackets and stack them up. It most busted them, but they made up the $6,000 clean and clear. Say, says the Duke. I got another idea. Let's go upstairs and count the money, and then take it and give it to the girls. Good land, Duke. Let me hug you. It's the most dazzling idea that ever did struck a man. You certainly have got one of the most astonishing heads I ever did see. Oh, this is the boss dodge. There ain't no mistake about it. Let them fetch along their suspicions now if they ever want to. This'll lay 'em out. When we got upstairs, everybody gathered around the table, and the king, he counted it up and stacked it up. $300 in a pile, 20 elegant little piles. Everybody looked hungry at it and licked their chops, and then they raked it into the bag again. And I see the king begin to swell himself up for another speech. And he says, "Friends all, my poor brother that lays yonder has done generous by them that's left behind in the vale of sorrers. He has done generous by these year poor little lambs that he loved and sheltered, and that's left fatherless and motherless. And yes, and we knowed that them and him that he knowed would have done more generous by them if he hadn't a feared of wounding his dear William and me. Now wouldn't he? There ain't no question about it in my mind. Well then, what kind of brothers would it be that'd stand in his way at such a time? And what kind of uncles would it be that'd rob, yes rob, such poor sweet lambs as these at such loved ones at such a time? If I know William, and I think I do, well, I'll just ask him." And he turns around and begins to make all sorts of signs to the Duke with his hands. The Duke looks at him stupid and leather-headed for a while, and then all of a sudden he seems to catch his meaning and jumps for the king, a-goo-gooing with all his might for joy, and hugs him about 15 times before he lets up. And then the king says, "I reckon I knowed it. I reckon that'll convince anybody the way he feels about it. Here, Mary Jane, Susan, Joanna, take the money. Take it all. It's the gift to him that lays yonder, cold but joyful." Well, Mary Jane, she went for him. Susan and the hare lip went for the Duke. And then such another hugging and a kissing I never did see. And everybody crowded up with his tears in their eyes, and the most shook their hands with the frauds, saying all the time, "Oh, you dear good souls, how lovely! Oh, how could you?" Well, then, pretty soon all the hands got to talking about the diseased again, and how good he was, and what a loss he was, and all that. And before long, a big iron-jawed man worked himself in there from the outside, and stood listening, and looking, and not saying anything. And nobody saying anything to him neither, because the king was a-talking, and they was all busy listening, and the king was saying, in the middle of something he'd started in on, "They being particular friends of the disease, that's why they're invited here this evening. But tomorrow we want all to come, everybody. For he respected everybody. He liked everybody. And so it's fitting that his funeral orgies should be public." And so he went on a-mooning on and on, liking to hear himself talk. And every little while he fetched in his funeral orgies again, till the Duke he couldn't stand it no more. So he writes on a little scrap of paper, "Obsequies, you old fool," and folds it up, and goes on a-goo-gooing and reaching over to people's heads to him. And the king reads it and puts it in his pocket and says, "Oh, poor William, afflicted as he is, his heart's always right. He asked me to invite everybody to come to the funeral. Wants me to make 'em all welcome. But he needn't worry. It's just what I was at." And then he weaves along again, perfectly calm, and goes to dropping his funeral orgies again, every now and then, just like he done before. And when he done it the third time, he says, "Well, I say orgies, not because it's the common term, 'cause it ain't. Obsesques is being the common term. But because orgies is the right term, obsesques ain't used in England no more now. It's gone out. We say orgies now in England. Orgies is better. Because it means you're after the more exact. It's a word that's made up out in the Greek, orgo, meaning outside or open and abroad, and the Hebrew, jism, to plant, to cover up. Hence, inter, you see, funeral orgies is an open or public funeral. He was the worst I ever struck. Well, the iron-jawed man, he laughed right in his face. And everybody was shocked. Everybody says, "Why, doctor!" And Abner Shackelford says, "Why, Robinson, ain't you heard the news? This is Harvey Wilkes." The king, he smiled eager, shoved out his flapper, and says, "Is it my poor brother, dear brother's good friend and physician? Keep your hands off me," says the doctor. "You talk like an Englishman, don't you? It's the worst imitation I ever heard. You, Peter Wilkes' brother, you're a fraud. That's what you are." Well, how they all took on. They crowded around the doctor and tried to quiet him down and tried to explain to him and tell how Harvey showed in 40 ways that he was Harvey and knowed everybody by name and the names of the very dogs and begged him not to hurt Harvey's feelings and the poor girl's feelings and all that. But it weren't no use. He stormed right along and said that any man that pretended to be an Englishman and couldn't imitate the lingo no better than what he did was a poor fraud and a liar. Well, the girls was hanging to the king and crying, and all of a sudden the doctor ups and turns on them, and he says, "Well, I was your father's friend, and I'm your friend, and I warn you as a friend, and an honest one, that wants to protect you and keep you out of harm's way and trouble, to turn your backs on that scoundrel and have nothing to do with him. The ignorant tramp with idiotic Greek and Hebrew, as he calls it. He's the thinnest kind of impostor. Has come here with a lot of empty names and facts which he picked up from somewheres. And you take them for proofs. And are helped to fool yourself by these foolish friends here, who ought to know better. Mary Jane Wilkes, you know me as your friend. And for your unselfish friend, too. Now listen to me. Turn this pitiful rascal out. I beg you to do it. Will you?" Mary Jane straightened herself up. And my, but she was handsome. And she says, "Here is my answer." And she hove up the bag of money and put it in the king's hand and says, "Take this $6,000 and invest it for me and my sisters any way you want to. And don't give us no receipt for it." Well, then she put her arm around the king on one side, and Susan and the harelip done the same on the other, and everybody clapped their hands and stomped the floor like a perfect storm, whilst the king held his head high and smiled proud. And the doctor says, "Well, all right, I wash my hands of the matter, but I warn you all that a time's a-coming when you're going to feel sick whenever you think of this day." And away he went. "Well, all right, doctor," says the king, kind of mocking him. "We'll try and get 'em to send for you." Which made them all laugh. And they said it was a prime good hit.